to The Struggle. We are here today with Heidi Yewman, who is an author, advocate, activist, has been heavily involved in the gun control sphere for more than 20 years and has done a lot of interesting good work. And through her story of advocacy has learned a lot about herself. So Heidi, why don't you start us off with a little bio about you and kind of what you've worked on and how you got where you are today?
Yeah, so I've been working on gun violence prevention for the last 26 years, and it's been my life's passion to stop mass shootings and all the shootings that happen every day in all of our communities, some that don't even make the news. And I've been working on that, like I said, for 26 years. And so obviously, well, I grew up in Colorado in the 80s, and I grew up with three brothers. We were all 4 years apart, and I was the third kid, the only girl. And we were very much a male-oriented family. And one of the things that was super valued in our family was athleticism and playing sports. And so as the only girl, I really gravitated towards that as a way to sort of be accepted into my family, and was pretty successful at it. I ended up playing volleyball in college on a scholarship and really loved sports. And one of the reasons that I really loved playing sports was that there were rules and consequences. So unlike my home, sports allowed me to try my best at something. And if somebody broke the rule, so for instance, I'm playing basketball and they hit me on the arm when I'm shooting, there was a referee who was making sure everybody was following the rules, and they would call a foul, and then I would get 2 free throws. And so I thrived in that space because someone was making sure that everybody followed the rules, and when they didn't follow the rules, then there was a consequence. And so that really helped me. That was the place where I could find a safe place to be when I was growing up in the type of family that I grew up in.
Right. And that structure of rule consequences is a level of protection, right? Somebody
Yeah.
can't just hit you on the arm in basketball and get away with it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if the referee doesn't call it, then the crowd goes insane. The coaches go insane. So yeah, it definitely is a safe space when you're in a chaotic atmosphere outside of the court or the field that you're playing the sport in.
Right. So let's kind of start with the struggle. And there are a couple of layers to it in your life. But let's start with the one that you're the most known for, which is the advocacy work that you did. What made you get involved in that? Because at that time, you were a stay-at-home mom raising two children, right? Not something necessarily you would have jumped right into just because. What was the catalyst for that, the start of that work?
Yeah, so 26 years ago, on April 20th, Columbine High School experienced a mass shooting where 12 students died and a teacher died. And I had graduated from Columbine High School 13 years before that massacre. And Dave Sanders, the teacher that was killed, had been my basketball coach. And I wasn't living in Denver at the time. I was living in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. And it was devastating to hear about his death. He had meant a lot to me when I was at that school. And then, so I decided to go back to his funeral. And like you said, I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I went back to his funeral and sat there. And as I'm looking at these former teachers and former classmates of mine, just devastated, red eyes, just sadness I've never experienced before. As I'm sitting at Dave Sanders' funeral, I decided, like, I've got to do something about this. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this has happened, and I need to be part of the solution to stop this from happening again. So I went full force into gun violence prevention. About a year after the massacre, there was a Million Mom March where 750,000 moms and other parents and loved ones gathered in Washington, D.C. And also there were a bunch of marches all over the country where we were wanting to get some gun control passed to stop this kind of carnage from happening. And it was at that march where I started seeing all these, I'll never forget it, these women with these T-shirts on, and there would be a picture of a cute kid, usually, and a birth date and a death date. And it's just so shocking to me to see this. This isn't a shirt you could wear to the mall. And their eyes were just haunted with sadness. But then there was also this bravery to them about, I'm here because my child mattered. I miss them terribly, and I'm here to stop this from happening to other families. And it just really struck me of how powerful that was. And they also, at the march, I remember there was a woman who spoke and started this campaign called the Asking Saves Kids campaign, or it's referred to as ASK. And it's where parents are encouraged to ask if there's a gun in somebody's home before you let their kids play at their home. And so I really gravitated towards this campaign, and I found that this was my legs, this was the beginning of my legs for the advocacy work. And I started going to PTAs at my kids' schools and talking to other parents about the importance of asking if there's a gun in somebody's home before letting your kids play there. And what I loved about it, it was a way to have a discussion about safety, and it wasn't about me judging you on whether you had a gun or not. It didn't matter. What mattered is if you did have a gun, that it was stored, it was locked up, and the ammunition was stored separately. And so I had some amazing conversations with people, and then it was a way for me to make sure that my kids were safe and that they weren't going to find a gun or be shot in somebody else's home when they were being taken care of.
I remember that campaign in those years. And
Mhm.
I actually had made a post about that on Facebook one time, and somebody that I knew chastised me for saying something about it and said, well, I know all the parents in my kids' lives well enough. I don't even have to ask the question. And I was like, I think that's
Yeah,
missing
but
the point.
that's like so not true. I remember I had a friend that I taught with. I'd been a middle school teacher before I became a stay-at-home mom, and
Yeah.
I this friend invited me over to her house, and she didn't have kids, and I had my two kids, and we got to her house before her. She was coming home from work, and she said, "Just make yourself at home, and then we'll have dinner when I get home." So I was like, "Cool." So I'm with my two kids in this stranger's house. She's a friend of mine.
Mhm.
Never thought to ask about guns, but I remember specifically making sure, especially with my 1-year-old, that he wasn't going to be able to get into like the Clorox under the sink. And so
Mhm.
I made sure to look to make sure that they were safe that way. So anyway, flash forward to a couple hours later, we had had dinner and we wanted to watch an episode of Friends. And I didn't want my kids to watch Friends because it wasn't appropriate. And also that would have been boring for them, right? So my friend said, "Oh, just have them go upstairs and they can watch a movie in our bedroom." And I was like, "That's a great idea." And her husband looks over at us and goes, "Oh, we need to move the guns." I'm like, "Move the guns? What guns?" And he says, "Oh, we have two loaded handguns in our nightstands." And I'm like, "What?" And so I thought back to earlier that afternoon, the kids had been like going upstairs, and I don't
Mhm.
know if they opened that drawer or not, but oh my God. And it just really made me realize I thought I knew her, and I thought,
Mhm.
but I never had that conversation with her. So people who own guns don't look different, right?
No,
So
they're your
it
everyday,
was,
and people who
yeah,
have guns don't necessarily store them the way you would want them stored, especially if it's
right.
something they've grown up with, they're comfortable with it in their minds, it's not as big of a deal. I live in Alabama and most people have guns.
Yeah.
Um, I just think, why would you not ask the question if it can prevent something? What's the harm? There's no harm in asking the question. There is a lot of harm not asking the question. So you can't just assume, so
Well, yeah.
that
And
level
that's
of
what
education. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, that's what motivated me. I'm like, I don't ever want to be on a stage like that
Hmm.
woman I saw at the Million Mile March talking about how my child was killed at a friend's house because I didn't ask the question, and I didn't ask because I was too embarrassed or it was too hard.
Right. So
Yeah.
in terms of the advocacy work you began, you started with PTA meetings, you kind of worked your way up and became a spokesperson on the national stage, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was on the board of Brady.
So what kinds of responsibilities do you have as you grow in that work?
So, I started doing a lot of vigils for people who had lost loved ones to gun violence. When Gabrielle Giffords was shot in Tucson, Arizona, I did a
Mhm.
vigil on the 1 year anniversary of that. I would do protests against, for instance, Starbucks had they were allowing people to openly carry their firearms in their
Mhm.
stores. And so a bunch of advocates and myself got together and we did a big protest against them, trying to get them to change their policy, which worked again. California Kitchen, they changed their policy because of it. Pete's Coffee and Tea, they did the same. But
Mhm.
Starbucks was pretty steadfast in their like they didn't want to make a position, but we were able to get them to change their viewpoint on that. And then I would testify at state houses on different bills. Um, so that it was, and the Asking States Kids campaign was the big thing that I did. I would speak at conferences and I would speak at, like I said, different kinds of moms groups in lots of different places.
So is this kind of work and this public speaking and this basically this fight for the safety of our kids, did that come
Yeah.
naturally to you?
Yeah, it did. I had never been in advocacy in that way, but I really loved it. I felt like I was doing something that mattered. When I was home with the kids with a 3 year old and 1 year old, right? That's hard. And it's so much about, I was in a mom's group and I was worried about things like, oh, I should get different drapes or, oh, I don't like the color of the wall in the family room. And all of a sudden I had this thing to care about that actually mattered. And I was able to get publicity around it, and I was able to learn how to contact media. And I certainly made a lot of mistakes at the beginning. So I was doing this protest against, or yeah, a protest against Bullseye Shooting Supply, which is in Tacoma, Washington.
Mhm.
So there had been they had illegally sold guns to these guys who went and basically for a month terrorized Washington D.C. It was called the D.C. Snipers, where they went
Mhm.
around for a month and just randomly shot people who were mowing the grass or um, getting gas, doing walking their dog, and they would just
Um,
go around and shoot them. Well, they were prohibited from buying guns, but this gun dealer in Tacoma, Washington decided like, hey, we'll sell it to you under the table. So we were protesting. It was one of the first protests I ever did, and I'm on this sidewalk in front of it with all these media and doing a speech, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was brand new. I thought I was going to be talking about what I thought about what happened at Columbine, but I was giving these talking points, and I'm like so nervous, and I'm like holding this paper like this,
yeah.
right? I'm shaking, and as I'm doing it, there's these big, huge pickup trucks that are streaming by, and these guys are screaming out, "Go home, gun grabbers!" or "F you!" And it was just nerve wracking. And honestly, what it did was it really reminded me. I grew up with a really angry dad
Mhm.
who was full of violence and vitriol, and it really I struggled with that because it was such a trigger.
Mhm. So, so to delve more into that, you had the struggle, you have the gun struggle that was sort of a universal struggle, and
Mm,
was less about you. You were representing the advocacy work, and you were representing groups and people and fighting for kids. That's one thing. But underneath that, you have this underlying personal struggle going on.
yeah.
And you hinted at it a couple of times talking about the violence of your dad, but tell us what was going on kind of under the surface as you're coming through this advocacy evolution.
Yeah, so a few stories. So, my first memory, one of my first memories of growing up was when I was 5, and my dad walked into my room. I was practicing writing my name. I'm in kindergarten. I'm 5 years old,
Hmm.
and he walks in the room, and I look up at him, and he looks at me and he says, "Don't look at me." And I'm like, "Okay." And so he walks away, and then he comes back a few minutes later, walks in the room, and I look up at him because like that's what a normal thing is that you do.
Mhm.
And he screams at me again, "Stop looking at me." And so he walks away, comes back, and then I feel him in the doorway, and I'm trying as a 5-year-old desperately not to look up. But I'm thinking in my head, well, and I remember this very specifically.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, well, maybe he has to tell me something. Maybe he changed his mind because he's just standing there. I could feel him. I think I saw him with my peripheral vision. And so I look up at him and he just goes crazy and walks over to me, or he grabs me out of the chair by my collar, pulls me back, and then punches me in the nose. And I start bleeding. Then he yells at me not to get blood on the carpet. He takes me over to this tin Mickey Mouse trash can, and we can hear the echoes of the droplets of blood coming out of my nose into the bottom of this trash can. And he leaves and goes and gets some tissue, and he comes back, and I can feel a different feeling from him, where he's not angry, and he says to me, I'm sorry, you shouldn't have looked up at me," and takes me over to the bed and puts the tissue on my nose and to get it to stop bleeding. And I lean into him. I'm 5, and I lean into him. I'm like, "Yeah, I won't. I'm so sorry, Daddy, and I won't do that anymore." And so grateful that he wasn't angry at me anymore. So that was like the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, as I said, grew up in a very male-oriented family, and because I was only the only girl, it wasn't really acceptable for me to scream or be upset. So they had this mantra for me that was meant, "Don't be a dumb girl," and they shortened it to DBADG. And so they would say, if I saw a spider and screamed, they'd say, "Heidi, DBADG." Or if I was upset with something and started crying, DBADG. And so I internalized this because this was throughout my whole childhood. And I
Mhm.
internalized it as, don't be dumb and don't be a girl, because girl attributes that wasn't an acceptable kind of person to be. And that's also kind of why I went into sports, because that seemed more male oriented.
Mhm.
And that's where I got praise. Um, so along all this, my parents when I was about 10, they bought a fireplace store. And in that fireplace store, that it was very successful at the beginning, and they made a lot of money, enough so that they built a swimming pool in our backyard and put a sauna and an additional room into our house. But there were three things that put into motion. So the first one was my parents became very stressed out, and again, it was successful at the beginning, but then it started to struggle. So my dad got increasingly angry about everything. My mom started drinking excessively and becoming emotionally absent. Um, and then we had all this money for this pool. But what that meant was, at the time, my brothers and I belonged to this local swimming pool. It's about a mile away. We'd ride our bikes down there and spend every day in the summer at this swimming pool. Well, once we got the swimming pool, there was no need for us to belong to the swimming pool because we could just swim in our own backyard. But what that did was, that was a loss of community, and it started this place of isolation. And so we're at home, bored all the time. And then we have this sauna, and my mom and dad aren't there a lot, but then they weirdly put up this sign. They were very much into like um nudity. And so we had a sign on the wall that actually said, "No swimming suits allowed after 6 p.m." And I suppose that could have worked, but as the only girl, that I didn't know I was uncomfortable at the time, but I was. And
Mhm.
so that became really challenging. And so there were these boundaries that were blurred. And so I'd have to go naked into this sauna with my three brothers and my dad, and my mom. And it was very confusing. In fact, I had a friend that I wanted to come over to go swimming, and she was required to also take off her swimming suit. And I remember she was really uncomfortable and was like, "This is weird." And I was like, "No, this isn't weird. This is like cool, that we're like Europeans." And she needless to say, she never came back again. And I
So
lost
how
that
old
friend
were you when this part began?
like at 11.
Hmm.
So I
So
wasn't
very, very weird age.
quite
It wasn't like you
developed.
were three.
I was just starting to develop, yeah,
Right.
physically. And then so we have all this isolation. My parents are gone every day and they're stressed. So my oldest brother was away at college. So my three brothers and or my other two brothers and I are just bored all the time. We're isolated. And my one brother, he invented this game called the boyfriend girlfriend game, where he had me, well, he basically molested me for several years. And, but nobody knew about it because again, we were isolated and bored. And so this was a really challenging time for me with that happening. And again, I really think if we wouldn't have had this swimming pool and the sauna and this blurred backgrounds, and my mom wasn't drinking and my dad wasn't angry, I don't think that that would have happened. So the anger, my dad's escalates, and I remember when I was in fifth grade, I failed a social studies class. It was on my report card as an F. And he found out about it. And that night he was very angry. And it was a very violent night of punching and hitting and me trying to not get hit and punched and screamed at. And at the near the end of the night, he said to me, I need you to get all your F papers. And so I went over to my desk, grabbed some of my spelling tests that I was particularly bad at spelling, gave those to him, and he was not satisfied with that. He said, this is only four of them. Where's all the rest? And so I went and got all the rest of my F papers. I'm not sure why I was saving those, but anyway, he had me tape all of the F papers onto my wall. And once I got them all up on the wall, he turned to me and he said, this is so all your friends can see how stupid you are. And Elizabeth, I woke up and I went to bed to that wall every night and every morning for months. And it was this, but between the DBADG and this wall, I really internalized that I am stupid and I'm dumb.
Mhm.
And so I acted accordingly. I didn't trust myself anymore. So every single test I ever took after fifth grade, I cheated on because I couldn't afford to do badly on a test or a grade and be beaten that way. And so I just cheated. And as you know, like in math or French or any subject, everything builds on itself, right? So you learn how to do this and then you learn how to do this. And so I sort of kneecapped myself in a way where I didn't learn the things. So jump ahead to my senior year of high school. I'm taking a French final, and I was cheating on the test and I got caught, and the teacher failed me for the semester. I had already been accepted on a volleyball scholarship into college, so it didn't affect that. But I had been really worried about my obsession with cheating and was worried about, like, because I had heard stories that if you cheat in college, you get kicked out. And so I was really worried about it. So I failed this class, got in trouble, not quite in the same way, but it was pretty devastating. And I didn't cheat after that because there's something about an outside person validating, like, you can't cheat. This is not okay. And but this continued, this mantra in my head that I am dumb, and it continues. I'm 57 now, and there's still a part of me that really believes that. And I mean, people talk about imposter syndrome, and I for sure have that, but it's like on steroids. And I walk into a room and I think that I'm the dumbest person in the room, always.
In spite of
And
all the things that you've accomplished.
yeah, I think so. If you look at online, there's all these psychologists talk about the family roles in a dysfunctional family.
Hmm.
And so I fit perfectly this role of kind of the wallflower, where my role in my family was to always just be the good girl and not
Mhm.
create waves. And my role was to not get anybody else in trouble. There was a moment where my dad had this cardboard file box from his army days, and someone had broken it, put a hole in the top of it, and he called all of us down into the basement where this was, and he said, "Someone's broken this. Who was it?" And no one answered. My mom didn't say yes, and my three brothers didn't say yes, and I didn't say yes because I knew I hadn't broken it. But then I was like, well, maybe I did, and I don't remember, which is ridiculous.
Mhm.
But anyway, so the stress was, he said, nobody's leaving until somebody admits that they did it, and no one's saying anything. So I couldn't handle the stress of the moment, and also I didn't want anyone else to get hit. And
Mm.
so I said that I did it. And so this is like a perfect example of me trying to sort of calm the waves and save everybody else. So my dad had everybody else leave, and then he, spanked me and hit me, and I got in all kinds of trouble. And then 2 hours later, I don't know what happened, but he called me back down and he said, "Did you do this?" And I could tell he knew I hadn't. And so I said, "No, I didn't." And then I got spanked and hit because I lied about about breaking the stupid file cabinet.
Mhm.
Um, but that was a typical response of mine, like, being molested by my brother. He had told me, don't tell anybody, and don't tell mom and dad because we'll get in trouble. And the word of "we" was really powerful in that moment as an 11-year-old,
Mhm.
all the way through the time I was 14. And
And that's the time
so
frame that
there
it
was that
lasted.
power, and I bought into that, and I've
Mhm.
I've always played that role in my family of, like, I'm really good at sports and you can pay attention to me and I can get accolades for all the sports that I do and my success. I didn't get success from academics for sure. Um, but yeah, that was basically my role in my family, was to be the good girl and do all the things correctly and right.
So in the power of the word we, was that
Mm.
did that make it more about you not wanting him and or others when things came up to get in trouble than it was about you? Because if you put you
The
two
we
together, then it was not all about, it was about more than you.
Yeah, it was more than it was "we," in that I think what was so damaging about that word was, and this is pretty typical with people who experience incest, is that you have guilt and shame. Even though you didn't do anything wrong,
Mhm.
you identify it as something that you have done wrong. And I think psychologically, from the studying I've done on it, is it's this way to control, like, this can't be happening to me, like,
Mhm.
it's too out of control.
Right.
So you sort of create this narrative that somehow you have something to do with it. Like, I wasn't forceful enough as an 11-year-old to get my 14-year-old brother to stop, right? Which, as an adult, I now recognize that's completely ridiculous. Like, you
Mhm.
don't have that kind of power. And he was put in a position of power. He was sort of the pseudo babysitter when my parents were
Mhm.
gone. And it's just something you can't stop yourself. And so you tell yourself that somehow you could. And this is very, very common with incest survivors.
Right. And how much older was he than you?
4 years.
4 years. So that's at that age is quite significant.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
nothing, the
Quite the
difference,
power dynamic.
right. There's a power dynamic, there's a seniority dynamic, there's a size differential between 10 and 14.
Hmm.
I mean, so all of those things, the powerlessness that you felt, um, had to all play into the psychology of that and how that lives, how you live with that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So let's start shifting into gifts because there's not, it's hard to talk about sometimes gifts of the struggle when you're talking about childhood abuse. I always,
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
thank God we can move on. Okay.
Yes, we can move forward for because there are gifts. Even though, like I always say, there's no gift in the loss of someone you love. There's no gift in a sick child. There's no gift in somebody who's experienced abuse. Um, and you've experienced like all of the kinds of abuse within the family dynamic, from neglect to physical abuse to sexual abuse to psychological abuse, all of the things that go together in a lot of situations like that. But you do gain things from having survived that, right? So so let's talk a little bit about, so with the advocacy, you wrote a book, Beyond the Bullet. You did a documentary. You spent a month with a gun to experience what that was like. Um,
Yeah.
so let's talk about how some of your childhood trauma kind of informed the things that you were doing. How did it hold you back, but also how did it push you forward?
Yeah, so you remember I referenced at the Million Mile March, I saw these women with T-shirts on with their child that had died or that had been murdered, or suicide, I suppose.
Hmm.
And I I really was interested in the stories of what amazed me was that these women could get out of bed every day and they could go to this march.
Hmm.
Like they were living my worst nightmare, right? Their
Yeah.
child had been killed.
Hmm.
And so I was really curious about, I wanted to know the answer, like, how do you get out of bed after you find out your child's been killed? And so at the time, it was sort of pre-internet, and I was really hungry for the stories to answer that question. And also Columbine had happened, and I didn't understand all those parents who'd lost kids at Columbine who were murdered. How did they manage living life after getting such devastating news? Because
Hmm.
Columbine was one of the big first mass shootings of this current generation.
Right.
Um, and so I decided I couldn't find books about that. And so I decided to write one. So I ended up interviewing 19 people who'd lost loved ones to gun violence and then wrote this book. So this is the book
Beyond the Bullet. Yeah.
about, right. And just sort of asking them like how, tell me about the worst day of your life and then how you managed afterwards. And but it was really hard. So my insecurities followed me into that, and I wasn't I wasn't a writer. I didn't go to school to become a writer, and so I felt like this. I felt dumb. I didn't know what I was doing. I had a tape recorder. Like, why would people trust me? And I felt like I was taking from them. So I remember there was this woman, Michelle, up in Seattle. Her son had been murdered at a party on one weekend night, and it had been 3 years earlier. And I was interviewing her, and she was so angry. And she was angry that the cops hadn't found the person who did it, and she couldn't get justice. And so she's telling me all this story, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm taking from her. Like, I can't believe she's trusting me to tell me this story. And I said to her, I said, Michelle, I was thinking she seems like she has PTSD. Not that I'm a therapist and
Yeah.
can tell somebody, diagnose somebody. But I said to her, I said, Michelle, have you ever talked to anybody about this before? And remember, her son had died 3 years earlier. And she said, well, I've talked to God. And then she looks at the ceiling and she's thinking and she goes, and I've talked to you. And
No.
it just hit me of like, oh, I am not taking from this woman. I'm giving my time, I'm listening, I'm showing her empathy, I care. And another woman, same similar situation, I stopped the interview in the middle because I felt like I was traumatizing her. And she said, no, please let me keep telling you this story because no one ever wants to listen to my story from the beginning to the end. And I go to support groups and I can talk for 10 minutes before I get interrupted. So this is amazing. Please keep asking me questions. And so that helped me overcome this thing of like that I'm taking from somebody and that I'm not of value or I'm not important. So that was really helpful. And then um, as I was doing all these protests, all these gun guys are showing up with these guns on their hips. And it was very intimidating and scary. And I think that's sort of why they had guns on their hips. And I'm thinking, why do these guys have guns with them all the time? Are we really that unsafe in this park or in this church where I'm having a vigil? Like, why, what's the deal with that? And so I thought, well, you know what? I want to know what these guys are thinking. So I decided to buy a gun, a Glock, and I got a permit to carry a concealed weapon. And I was living in the state of Washington. There was no requirement of any kind of safety class. You didn't even have to know how to shoot a gun. You just had to pay your money, wait a month while they did the background check, and then you could go buy a gun, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. And so I wrote a 4-part series for Ms. Magazine called My Month with a Gun. And I wrote about the emotional experience that I went through while I carried the gun with me. So I went to yoga classes, I went to church, I went to the grocery store, I went to the bank. Yes, you can carry a concealed weapon into a bank, I found out. I never took the gun into the school with me to pick up the kids because that's against the law. So I followed the law, including that I wasn't required to do a safety class. And so I ended up writing about all these experiences. And one of the things I found out that it made me really paranoid having this gun with me all the time. And I had a safe at home. So when I was at home, I locked it up. But I remember going to a business meeting up in Seattle, and I pulled into the third story of a parking lot, and I'm in my cute little pencil skirt and my black blazer and my high heels, and I'm on the third floor, and I go into the stairwell, and I'm walking down the stairs, and this guy comes up behind me on the second floor. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, I'm in this stairwell by myself with this guy, and oh my gosh, I'm so vulnerable right now. I'm in my high heels. Like he could do anything he wants to me. And an episode of Oprah goes through my head about how to keep yourself safe in these kinds of situations. And so I put my hand in my purse and put my hand around the gun, and I'm thinking, okay, if he tries anything, I'll just shoot him. And then, so we're getting down to almost to the first floor, and I realize, wait, he's behind me. The only way I could stop him from doing something or attacking me is if I face him and get the gun out and point it at him. But that's like going to be weird because he hasn't done anything yet. I don't know that he's some guy with ill intent. So I'm like sweating, and my brain is going crazy, and I'm thinking all this stuff. And so we get down to the bottom of the stairwell, and then I turn to the right, and I'm sweating. And then he goes to the left and goes to wherever he was going, and he had no ill intent. And it really put home to me the amount of extra energy that I was spending thinking about how people might or could harm me. I don't usually think that way. Right? At night, I would ruminate about, instead of like, oh, my son, I need to help him with his science project tomorrow. Oh, I got to pay this bill tomorrow. All those normal mom things that go through your head. I didn't have any of those thoughts. I was thinking about, okay, so if a guy breaks in, my husband's out of town, and so he's going to come up the stairs, so I'll get the gun out and then I'll shoot him. But then there's going to be a dead guy in our house, and like my son's going to wake up, and I don't want him to see a dead body. And I'm like ruminating, and I can't sleep. And I'm thinking, I can't be the only person that this happens to. But so it was a really interesting experience, and I understood the paranoia that happens a little bit more with the guys I was interacting with constantly at these protests and these events that I was organizing. And then lastly, there was the Sandy Hook massacre, where the 26 kids in Connecticut were killed along with their teachers and the principal. And it was such a tragic day. Most people remember like where they were when that happened. And a couple days later, Wayne LaPierre, who at the time was the head of the NRA, he went on TV and he said, the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I thought, oh my God, how ridiculous is that? Like, we don't need more guns right now. And But it made me think about, okay, so this is the narrative that they're going to be pushing and people are going to believe it. So I want to know about this. So surely if you are the good guy with the gun and you save the day, someone starts a mass shooting and you shoot them or whatever it is, like, so you just go home and have a sandwich and go on with the rest of your life? Like, that can't be true.
Hmm.
And so I couldn't do the month with the gun kind of situation and go and kill somebody, right? And then see how it feels.
Couldn't
That
act
wasn't
that one
very,
out. No.
yeah, that wasn't very practical.
Right.
So I ended up, I started interviewing. I found people who had shots, they bought guns in self-defense, and then the gun got used in a way that wasn't intended, or the consequences of it were devastating. So, for instance, I interviewed this guy up in Washington State, lived in a rural area. He came home from a trip, and two guys were in his house stealing his stuff. And so he came in the back door and startled them, and they ran out to the front door, and he shot both of them and killed one of them. One of them bled out on his front lawn. And the thing about that was, he wasn't arrested or he wasn't charged with a crime, because in the state of Washington, and each state is different, you can shoot someone in the back as they're trying to escape your house if they're in your house. In Arizona, they have to be like charging towards you. So so the law said you're good to go. But when I interviewed him 3 years after this incident,
Hmm.
he was having all kinds of nightmares, and he was paranoid. He had guns all around his house just in case. He carried a gun on his hip as he was like chopping wood in the backyard just in case. And it was really striking to me about, again, that paranoia and how the guns change people emotionally and mentally.
It's like it creates the hair trigger reaction,
Yeah.
right? Because they're always
But
on the ready.
the gift that came, which is what we were talking about,
Mhm.
is I've gained incredible empathy for people because of what I've experienced as a child, and also, again, feeling dumb. So I meet the Kevin, the guy that I interviewed, and I didn't view myself as any better than him. And I was
Mhm.
very curious. He scared the crap out of me. He was a cliche in the way that I think of gun guys. Fox News was playing all the time in the background.
Mhm.
Um, and he had his beliefs, and so that's fine. And I didn't judge him for that in that way, because I sort of viewed myself as less than him, or dumb. And but it allowed me to really have a lot of empathy for him, and and see his perspective on things.
Well, and that's creating a relationship based on humanity, not based
Mm,
on beliefs or political views or whatever it is that drives him and us, to be
yeah,
the ways that we all are. Finding that human element, that how did this experience impact him,
yeah.
right? Do you think that your childhood combined with the work that you've done is something that is that one of the gifts too, is just seeing people as human beings regardless of circumstance?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I interview people very open-hearted, and there was even
Mhm.
some practical things as a filmmaker. When you interview somebody, it's hard because you're in my situation. I'm asking them, tell me about the worst day of your life.
Mhm.
And with with gun violence, there's typically a perpetrator and a victim. But in these situations of the people in my film, there's shame involved because he took a life. So he has shame about that, even though the law told him, no, you're good to go.
Mhm.
I interviewed a family in North Carolina where the 8-year-old boy found the mom's gun and killed his 5-year-old little brother. And when I interviewed them 10 years after the that happened, um, the you could feel the shame. And they could go to groups where they talk about, there's all kinds of groups for families who've lost children to either gun violence or any kind of death, cancer, whatever it might be. But this kid Taylor, he can't go to that kind of a support group, and there is no support group for, hey, if you accidentally kill your little brother, here's a support group you go to.
Right.
And so there was such this complexity. And
Hmm.
with going back to my own situation and having shame, so much shame around the incest, is it was there was like a parallel with the people I was interviewing, because the complexity of their situation of, yeah, like Kevin, the guy was in my house stealing my stuff, so of course I shot him. But then also feeling shame for killing a person. And then he had a neighbor who every time his neighbor saw him would say, "Hey, Kevin, did you kill anybody today?"
Uh,
And it's just this like heaviness to it. And so I related in that way. And
mhm.
but that was the gift, is I could be open-hearted when I interviewed people, because I I got it in a way, right?
Mhm.
Not exactly the same, but that the complexity of trying to do your best, and but sort of messing up, and then having shame.
Right. Well, and the complexity of being subject to things that weren't your fault.
Yeah,
And
right.
like this guy legitimately had somebody in his house. I mean, that what he did was not necessarily wrong, right? He's protecting himself and his
Right.
family.
Yeah, and he had
You
every
know,
right to. Yeah.
yeah, and so the child who accidentally kills a sibling, that's
Hmm.
you cannot assign blame to that child who's stupidly gotten
Exactly.
access to a gun, by
Yeah.
no means of his own. So I think there's got to be a parallel there too, that you had experienced things that made you feel shame that had nothing to do with decisions that you made.
Yeah, I
And
would
some of these
agree.
people experienced similar things, that there's complexity of life, of a lot of times we end up in situations that we didn't cause, but we've got to deal with and make us feel ways that are natural but are damaging and not necessarily true.
Yeah, and I think I got really good. I could show up for somebody else's heartbreak,
Hmm.
without having to crack open my own, right? And it wasn't necessarily that I was avoiding my own trauma, but I just wasn't ready to sit with it, like not
Hmm.
truly. And so I feel like I practiced empathy on everyone else,
So that
you
you could
know?
eventually show it for yourself.
Right, right. Because I just wasn't ready to do that yet. And again, the shame has just consumed me my whole life.
Hmm.
And
So,
then even around my dad, and like I know in my head that I didn't deserve to be hit in the way, especially as much as I tried to be a good girl. I didn't deserve any of that, but there's still this thing in my head of like, oh, I should have been better. And I think this is true in any time you talk to someone who's been involved in domestic abuse,
mhm.
right? It's a constant theme of, if I just put the towels right, or if I just do this. And my room was constantly impeccably clean.
Hmm.
And I thought that could spare me from being hit, but
Yeah.
it didn't
Yeah.
work
I
out
mean, and
that
I
way.
think when you see that happen, so in my neighborhood, which is very quiet, filled with a lot of older people, the next door neighbor Airbnbs it, and some mother had rented out their house to throw her 17-year-old boy a party, left. 20 of his friends came over. They were smoking pot and doing all the bad things. So the owner of the house stays two doors down when she's Airbnb. So they called the police. Anyway, the boy's mother would not come pick him up. He was a very young, immature 17. He looked 14. Um, and he was a black kid. So when the police came, my husband and I stayed out there to make sure that he was okay.
Right.
And then we're
Yeah.
also staying there to make sure that these two girls who had the Airbnb were okay, because they were
Yeah.
younger, and my husband's a big guy and we're older. We weren't
Yeah.
scared.
Yeah.
But his mom never came. And we were
Mm.
that's when our hearts broke, because we are like, he shouldn't have been doing those things, but he was set up for failure by the mother who left him alone to do it.
Right.
However, I don't care how dumb my kids were, what stupid decisions they made. If they did that and we got called, we were showing up.
Yeah,
You know what I
right.
mean? And we were going to take care of them. So the fact that you felt that you weren't allowed to make poor choices ever is
Yeah, that's
is not a
right.
normal way of growing up. You know, most children who are not in abusive homes know that they can make stupid teenage decisions and the parents are still going to come bail them out. You may get in trouble, but you're going to get bailed out of the cop car, right?
Yeah,
And you don't
right.
have that sense of normalcy and security that you're allowed to make those normal human mistakes. You should be able to fail a test or even 10 and not have them papered to your wall.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, who does that? So, you know, one of the things in previous conversations we've talked about is how and then so your book, Don't Be a Dumb Girl, which is coming out soon, kind of is written in parallel to I'm doing this gun advocacy work, but then this experience kind of informed that situation. And then I had this gun advocacy experience, and then this childhood situation informed that. So one of the gifts seems to be from talking to you that going through the advocacy journey that you've been on did help clarify some of this trauma for you. And like the gun guys that you talk about that were terrifying, that clearly harkens back to your violent father, right? So do you think that this journey that you've been on is something that helped you get to a point where you were ready to sit with the trauma and you were ready to talk about it, because here you are now doing that?
Yeah, I think certainly, especially with the angry, like I find it almost funny that I could have gone into so many different kinds of advocacy work. And so I go into gun violence prevention, which is there's so much anger and vitriol, and it's just like seething with angry people. And um, like I was deathly afraid of angry men.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go into a field that's full of angry men with guns. And but it's that's like what I needed to do to work through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can be screamed at while I'm doing a speech, and with a guy with a gun on their hip, and I can live through that, and I can be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I it's like I had to go through that. I had a press conference once where I was promoting Asking Saves Kids campaign, and I had the mayor there, and the health department chair, and a couple state reps, and the no press came, and it was
Oh,
so embarrassing. It was horrible, but like I lived through it, and as my husband said when I got home, he said, "Well, okay, no one died, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Also, now you're like a true advocate, because you're not really a true advocate until you have a press conference with no press." And I thought that was a good way to frame it. But
yeah.
yeah, all these different experiences that I had to go through, it's I through this advocacy, I found my power, I found my voice, I found my inspiration, and I found a way for my empathy to be an asset rather than something that goes against me.
Right.
I could be that good girl, and that instinct of I want to be the nice person. I could do that without it hurting me, and it was helping other people.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of writing this book, what are some of the gifts that you are? I mean, it hasn't come out yet, so it's not
Right.
something that a whole lot of people have read, and we're going to talk about where people can find it and pre-order it in a little bit. But what are the gifts you are getting in the process of writing it, and what do you anticipate this doing for you going forward? Is this something that's going to help you be able to release some of that trauma from yourself, your body, your mind, your psyche?
Well, yeah, so I can advocate all day long for other people, and I can help other people tell their stories, but I was really stuck on telling my own story.
Mhm.
Again, it's the shame that's around it. And again, this is very common for people who've experienced sexual abuse, especially within the family.
Mhm.
And, like I said earlier, so I was practicing empathy on everybody else first. And so writing this memoir was really different. And it wasn't curated and it wasn't safe. But it was like me finally saying, I'm not just someone who tells hard stories. I've lived one.
Mm.
And and it felt like it was this final piece. And it's interesting because as I tell friends about the book, especially people who have worked on gun violence prevention with me, they are shocked to find out that I had this past. I
Mhm.
had a woman who I shared an early an ARC advanced reader copy with, and she said, "I can't believe that you lived through all this. You like smile all the time."
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, that's like we all wear a mask of some type as we go through life and through our day, right? Because we want to be seen as a certain way. But it really has been devastating to me to keep this a secret, and it feels nice. It's terrifying right now and scary for because I've kept this. I've doled out the story to just a few people, a few friends that I feel like I can trust to
Mhm.
have the story, and know about me. But I've decided the only way I can get through this shame is to just blast it out, and where I can't control the story anymore. And so that's what I'm working on doing. And it's the writing of the book was incredibly healing. So for instance, my editor would say, okay, the scene where your dad punches you in the nose, like, okay, that's an interesting story and it's terrible, but I want to know, what did the room feel like? What did he smell like?
Yeah.
What did his face look like? Were there lines on his brow? And what that did was it forced me to go back and relive it,
Hmm.
to remember those kinds of details. And and it was super hard, but it was healing. I often tell people I feel like I gave therapy to myself. So it was hard, but it was really important work. And I feel like the process of writing the book, the edge of that knife is a little bit less sharp, and the memories are not quite as sharp. I'm not thinking of the metaphor right now, but yeah, it was definitely a helpful thing to do, even though it was hard. So the other gift of growing up playing sports is when you play basketball, your coach at the end of practice makes you do all these wind sprints, right? And you hate it, and it's terrible, and it's hard, and you can't breathe, and you hate it. And but like, this is so good for me because in the game I'm not going to be winded and I'm not going to be breathless, and I'll be able to run up and down the court um with no problem. And so it's good for you. So I felt like this was that I dug into that kind of idea about, this is hard, it's frustrating, it's sad. Some days I don't want to write about this, but I know ultimately it's going to be really healing for me, and it's going to be good. And then ultimately, the best part about it is it's going to help other people who've been through these situations. I would have loved to have read this book
Mm.
when I was 19, when I just gotten out of high school, and I'm taking a family studies class in college, and I'm first learning about family dynamics of dysfunctional families, and I'm learning about incest, I'm learning about alcoholism, I'm learning about rageaholics, and I'm just so overwhelmed by all of it, and realizing, oh, my family wasn't perfect. And I would have loved to have read this book and to know that, like, in 40 years you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives you hope. And I think that is the gift of you doing this for other people. There are
Mhm.
gifts for yourself, and the
Yeah.
healing and the realization of what was it, what should have been, that wasn't what happened to you through no fault of
Yeah.
your own. But
Right.
also the gift of putting this out into the world is that somebody at 19 going through something similar is going to have that book.
Yeah,
That's going
exactly.
to let them know that number one, they're not alone. And number two, you came out the other side of it. and
Yeah.
so can they.
Yeah,
So
and that it is hard. And I think that's what I love about your podcast, because
Mhm.
there is the gift, but there's the struggle that informs the gift. And that's why the gift is so rich and so full, because you go through this struggle and the pain to get to the gift.
You do. And I think one person that I interviewed years ago on another version of the podcast said to me when I had asked her to come on, she said, I had never even considered that there could be a gift until you asked me that question. And so sometimes I think it's really hard to frame certain struggles as gifts, but there's almost always some kind of gift, even if it's just periphery, to some situations. But I think the power is in the telling, right, of the
Yeah.
story.
I,
So I think two final questions here. One is, after all of the things that you've done and all of the work that you've done with both the gun control advocacy and the writing, Don't Be a Dumb Girl, have you come to the conclusion that you are not, in fact, a dumb girl?
yes, I don't think I'm a dumb girl. But there's definitely still a shadow, and I'm not
Mhm.
sure I'm ever gonna come around it. I'm never gonna walk into a room and say, I'm here, and aren't you so happy? Because I'm so smart. In fact, when we were talking about the title of the book, it was oh, and then I didn't. This is, I don't know if
Yeah,
you end up.
definitely hold it up. I love
I
that
don't
photo
know
of
if you
you.
show this in the thing, but
Yeah.
I we were talking about the title of the book, and uh, the publisher said, "Well, I'm not sure 'Dumb Girl' is going to work." And she said, "Because we usually like a more positive kind of title." And she said, "How about Gun Girl to Smart Girl?" And I'm like, I just don't identify as smart girl.
Mhm.
It's a bridge too far. And so, Elizabeth, hopefully someday I will think that. I think I'm accomplished. I think I've done great things. I think I've really helped people. I love the contributions that I've made so far in the world. I love that my kids don't know what it's like to recover from childhood terribleness. I love that I've given that to them, and that it didn't repeat.
Mhm.
Um, and I loved that I could pretend that I knew what being uh, healthy sexually was, even though I don't know what that's like.
Mhm.
Um, I, I, but I won't. You'll never catch me saying I'm smart. I could say I'm not dumb, but and I think part of that kind of keeps me humble in a way too. There is a part of me that I like about the softness of me, that I don't have this ego,
Mhm.
and it does help me in a room. I used to think it was this huge deficit, but now I can go into a room and not think I'm the smartest person. But what that allows me to do is I don't have this ego, and I don't have to constantly. I have friends who are super smart, and they seem to be burdened by it because
Mhm.
they're constantly having to live up to it and people's reputations. So I don't feel like I ever have to um, be the smartest in the room and let myself down when I'm not, because I'm always trying to be better.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I think there's a difference. I mean, humility is a good thing
Yeah.
always. You don't want to walk into the room and say, I'm the smartest person in the room. I mean, there's something to be said for that. But I think what you're describing is also making you relatable. And
Yeah.
so I think when you're a storyteller and you interview people, being able to share a vulnerability or being able to share an experience that maybe isn't the most pleasant thing in the world to share, but you can say that to somebody who is trying to share with you, and you can say, I have an experience where I can kind of understand at least how
Yeah.
hard this is for you, and the power it's going to give other people, and the power of telling the story. So I mean, I think the word smart seems to be a little bit of a loaded word for you.
For sure.
which is
I'll work
okay.
on that, okay?
Right.
My
Yeah. We need to
therapist
work
and
on
I will
that
work
because
on that.
clearly, you couldn't have done half of these things if you didn't have some brains in your head. But I think the way that you frame it is what makes you accessible and vulnerable and willing, and other people willing to tell you their stories, which is an incredible gift. Um,
Yeah, and I also think part of it is reframing it, right?
mhm,
So I didn't think I was particularly creative.
mhm,
I've learned since that I am creative. So
mhm.
I think of smart in terms of academics and being able to keep a lot of information in your head and recall it easily. So I wasn't great at arguing with gun guys because I can't keep statistics in my head the
Yeah.
way, but I don't think a lot of people actually can.
No, I
So,
can't.
and so I think being a great mom is a form of smart.
Mhm.
Anticipating things is a form of smart. Being creative is a form of smart. Being able to cold call somebody to ask them if they'll talk to you to be interviewed for a film after they've shot and killed an intruder, that's a form of smart.
Mhm.
So I think it's looking at it from a different perspective and redefining. That's what I've kind of had to do is redefine what smart is. So I'll
Yeah.
never go back to school and get a master's because I'm not smart enough, but I can do all these other things. So it's what is smart? We have to decide that all for ourselves.
We do. I think that's a perfect point. And gifts are gifts. They don't have to be defined
Yes,
by that
right.
word. And all the things that you just described are gifts,
Yeah.
right? And they're gifts to yourself and they're gifts to other people. So right now, I would like you to tell everybody how they can find you and your book and your Beyond the Bullet book and your film.
Yeah. So this is the film Behind the Bullet. So it's for people who shot and killed somebody. And it's available on Amazon. And then, um, or I guess Prime is what it's called now, right? Prime.
Right,
And
yes.
then this is the first book, The 19 People Who've Been Impacted by Gun Violence. And that's available on Amazon and my website, HeidiYewman.com. And then my book that's coming out, it's released the 19th of August, but you can pre-order it now on Amazon. And again, more information on HeidiYewman.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. I think this
Yeah,
was
thank you.
really insightful, and I think it will help a lot of people understand that they are not alone and that they too
Oh, I
can
sure hope so.
come out the
Yeah,
other side. So thank
yeah.
you so much. I appreciate it. And when the book comes out, we'll have you back.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Thank you so much,
All right.
Elizabeth.
Thank you.